On this Friday night, from pariah to Alberta's next premier.
I'm back!
Danielle Smith wins the race to replace Jason Kenney. His reflections.
If I were to go back.
And her pledges for the road ahead. Nuclear Armageddon, the U.S. president's ominous warning to the world about the war in Ukraine. Help wanted, the new tactics to recruit employees.
Thinking outside of the box is an important thing to do.
And the newcomers to Canada already landing work. Plus, take me out to the ball game.
I just love the Jays so much.
Let's go Blue Jays!
Toronto hits a fever pitch.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. It is quite the story. From political exile to premier, Danielle Smith has reinvented herself right into Alberta's top job. She's the new leader of the ruling United Conservative Party and will lead until at least May, when the next provincial election will be held. What's unclear is Alberta's future with Smith at the helm, and whether some of her attention-grabbing promises, like a Sovereignty Act, become reality. Now, even though Smith hasn't been shy about her hostility to Ottawa and the Prime Minister, as Heather Yourex-West reports, she doesn't see herself as a divisive figure.
Please welcome the next Premier of our province, Danielle Smith.
8 years ago, few Alberta political watchers would have seen this coming.
I'm back!
As political comebacks go, Danielle Smith's is one for the books.
In 2014, the then leader of the opposition Wild Rose Party made a move so deeply unpopular she became a pariah. After crossing the floor to merge with the governing Progressive Conservatives, Danielle Smith's political career appeared over. Until Thursday night in Calgary, when it roared back to life.
Danielle Smith won, but she didn't win by a huge margin. It was actually a bit of a nail-biter, I think, and she didn't win until the 6th ballot.
With just over 50% of 85,000 ballots, Smith becomes Alberta's premier without the mandate of the province.
My first choice was not Danielle Smith, but now that we've got her, we've got to get behind her.
I've heard good things and bad things about Janelle, but this is what the people want, and let's hope we're not wrong.
I am concerned. I'm a proud Calgarian. I love Alberta, but above all else, I'm a Canadian.
But the celebratory period for Danielle Smith will have to be a short one. There is just 7 months until Albertans head to the polls. And NDP leader, former Premier Rachel Notley, is hoping to make a political comeback of her own.
Smith has made it plain that the real issues Alberta families are struggling with are of no interest to her. Instead, she's preoccupied with a so-called Sovereignty Act.
With the focus squarely on a new premier and her new plans.
No longer will Alberta ask permission from Ottawa to be prosperous and free.
The provincial election campaign has unofficially begun. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
And later, we'll have an exclusive broadcast interview with outgoing Premier Jason Kenney, who outlines why he thinks his leadership ultimately failed. Nike is the latest brand to cut ties with Hockey Canada over its handling of sexual assault allegations. At the same time, the Prime Minister wasn't mincing words, saying Canadians have lost confidence in the organization's leadership, and he's calling on those at the top to step aside.
If these individuals continue to be deluded enough to think that there is a pathway forward for them to continue to run Hockey Canada, then Canadians will have no choice but to look for another structure to run our national winter sport.
6% of Hockey Canada's funding, about $7 million a year, comes from the federal government. That money has now been frozen. Corporate sponsorships had accounted for just over 1/4 of its funding. Health Canada has approved the use of another bivalent booster. The Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is the first to target the 2 most prevalent strains of the virus circulating in Canada. The shot targets the Omicron BA.4 and BA.5 subvariants, as well as the original strain of the virus. It is authorized for use as a booster dose in people 12 years of age and up, and doses are expected to start arriving in Canada next week. After 3 straight months of losses, the Canadian economy is finally creating jobs. According to Statistics Canada, 21,000 jobs were added last month. That pushed the unemployment rate down to 5.2%. But the labor market remains extremely tight in this country. And as Anne Gaviola explains, that's forcing some employers to come up with creative ways to find workers.
In September, employment among men and women aged 25 to 54 increased as many parents returned to the workforce with kids back in school. The jobless rate dropped, wages went up, signs of a labor market that's stretched.
It's extremely tight, and it's been tight since a lot of those COVID restrictions have been lifted.
The labor squeeze has forced employers to get creative. During peak summer season, when its staffing requirements nearly double, Ottawa Embassy Hotel turned to Facebook groups to recruit newcomers from Ukraine.
Ukrainian workers have been a godsend to us.
There were learning curves and language barriers, but nothing patience and Google Translate couldn't solve.
Working outside of your comfort zone, thinking outside of the box is an important thing to do.
Canada has nearly 1 million job vacancies, and the federal government is looking to ease the labor shortage by lifting off-campus work caps for international students.
We're lifting the limit of 20 hours per week that eligible students are allowed to work off-campus while studying. This means that more than 500,000 international students who are already here in Canada are going to be eligible to work more if they choose to do so.
The immigration minister says eligible foreign nationals can also work while waiting for a new permit or extension. The central bank has said the tight labor market is partly to blame for red-hot inflation, going as far as suggesting employers think twice before raising wages. Those remarks angering union representatives fighting for pay increases as the cost of living erodes spending power.
With high inflation, the pressure to pass along to workers is getting stronger and stronger, and the more that businesses resist it, the harder it is for them to find labor.
The Bank of Canada is hoping to avoid a wage price spiral, where inflation pushes wages higher, in turn pushing prices higher. But worker shortages tilt bargaining dynamics in favor of employees over employers. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Canadians whose deaths are not imminent may still qualify for medically assisted dying after eligibility was expanded last year. More than 10,000 of those individuals decided to end their lives in 2021. That's up 32% from 2020. And now there are concerns about the potential for unnecessary deaths. Tomorrow on The New Reality, Marianne Dimain looks at a population in crisis. Canadians living with disabilities who are living in poverty.
Imagine being hit with a debilitating illness and trying to live on $1,200 or $1,300 a month while the cost of everything else continues to rise. That's the grim reality for 1.5 million Canadians with disabilities who are living in what advocates called legislated poverty.
I was doing good. I was making good money, 85 grand a year.
Les Landry was a truck driver a decade ago. That is, until a cascade of health issues hit.
This is my blister pack.
A hernia, blood pressure, epilepsy, and mini strokes took away his ability to work.
That's for a week.
It's gotten so bad, Landry has decided to apply for MAID, or medical assistance in dying, but not because of the pain.
Like in my case, the problem is not really the disability, it is the poverty.
Experts have warned that Canada put people with disabilities like Landry in jeopardy by expanding access to MAID without expanding financial and social supports first.
We're getting rid of this idea that we'll first try the least interventionist measures. We've forgotten, I think, the seriousness of ending the life of a person as a measure to relieve their suffering.
And he says the government failed to implement basic safeguards that exist in other countries with medically assisted dying laws, like requiring patients and doctors to exhaust all other support and treatment options first.
I have some disabilities, I'm living in pain.
Les Landry's message to Canadians: he is not suicidal, but he simply can't afford to live.
I don't want to die. I just can't see me living like this for the rest of my life.
There may be help on the horizon for some disabled Canadians. Legislation to establish a new federal disabilities benefit is before Parliament, but it won't help Les Landry. He turned 65 in May, and the benefit will not apply to seniors. Marianne Dimain, Global News.
For a deeper look at the poverty crisis facing Canadians with disabilities, watch The New Reality Saturday at 7 right here on Global. The federal government says it's buying historic land at Juno Beach to save it from development. Canada's partnering with France and will contribute about $4 million to keep the battlefield from turning into condos. A developer had planned to build a 70-unit housing complex on the site. Under the deal, the area will be protected in a 99-year lease. Juno Beach is where hundreds of Canadian soldiers died on D-Day in the Second World War. The Veterans Affairs Minister says some parcels of land should never be touched. Never. They championed human rights and democracy. Coming up, the activists awarded this year's Nobel Peace Prize. Stunning comments from the U.S. president suggesting Russian threats to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine have put the world on the brink of Armageddon. Joe Biden's remarks were made behind closed doors last night and serve as a dire warning. The Russia-Ukraine war could quickly trigger a much wider conflict. Our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Prosko joins us now. Jackson, what exactly did Biden say?
Farah, the American president made it clear he does not think Vladimir Putin is joking with threats to use nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons in Ukraine. Because in Joe Biden's words, Russia's military is, quote, significantly underperforming. Biden told the crowd at a private fundraiser in New York, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis." The concern, of course, is that an increasingly desperate Russia may deploy a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, something to counter the staggering losses Russian forces have faced. Biden told the crowd, "I don't think there is any such thing as the ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon." Today, the White House is trying to calm concerns, suggesting there's no change in U.S. nuclear posture and no new intelligence suggesting Russia is prepared to launch a nuclear weapon. Still, the concern is that a cornered Vladimir Putin may act in unpredictable ways. In fact, the Washington Post reports that U.S. intelligence now believes Putin has recently been confronted by someone in his own inner circle in an apparent disagreement over Putin's handling of the war in Ukraine. The criticism was considered significant enough that it was included in President Biden's daily intelligence briefing. Farah, it all suggests there's potentially significant turmoil within the Kremlin, and that only bolsters those fears that Russia under Putin may resort to unpredictable actions.
Certainly. Jackson Prosko in Washington, thank you. The federal government is hitting Iran with tough new sanctions. Condemnation is growing over its violent crackdown on people protesting the death of Mahsa Amini. Today, an Iranian coroner's report says she died from organ failure, not blows to her body. The coroner says a heart disorder linked to an old surgery caused Amini to lose consciousness. The 22-year-old died in custody last month after being detained by Iran's so-called morality police. She was accused of not fully covering her hair and wearing inappropriate attire. Her family claims she was beaten by officers. Today, Canada declared more than 1,000 members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard inadmissible for life.
We're invoking rarely used measures that have been used against some of the most murderous regimes in the world, whether it was around the Rwandan genocide or war crimes in Bosnia, to apply them to this murderous Iranian regime.
Trudeau also vowed to improve Canada's ability to enforce sanctions, announcing the creation of a new Sanctions Bureau with Global Affairs Canada and providing an additional $76 million to that group and the RCMP. This year's Nobel Peace Prize puts the spotlight on human rights, democracy, and peaceful coexistence of neighbors who are now embroiled in war. As Crystal Gamansing reports, the prize is being shared between a jailed Belarusian activist and human rights groups from both Russia and Ukraine, all prominent critics of Russian President Vladimir Putin and his allies.
War crimes against Ukrainians have been reported from Bucha to Izum, and the horrors are being documented. One agency has been at the forefront of that deeply disturbing work.
I'm calling you on behalf of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. The Center for Civil Liberties will be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
It's incredible, seriously. The Ukrainian group is being honored alongside the Russian human rights group Memorial. It was forced to cease official operations last year after being labeled a foreign agent. Imprisoned Belarusian activist Elise Belyatsky is also being honored.
I'm glad that Nobel Committee also recognized human rights defenders from Ukraine and Russia, because the fight against two vicious dictators, Lukashenko and Putin, is the fight for democracy for all the world.
The exiled Belarusian opposition leader called Belyatsky a national hero and hoped the award would remind the world that he and others are languishing in prison for speaking out. The community of human rights defenders, of people who protect people from different countries, is the most important community, says one member of Memorial Group. In Ukraine, especially on social media, talk of the award is mixed with anger. Few Russians or Belarusians have spoken out against the war, and Ukraine is being recognized for work as a result of the Russian invasion. This prize gives us inspiration and an understanding that the direction of our work is important for building peace, democracy, and freedom in Ukraine. Crystal Gabansing, Global News, London.
Ahead, the tale of two premiers. Alberta's outgoing and incoming leaders share their visions for the province. Outgoing Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has some idea about why he was ousted from his job, and he's sharing those reasons in a broadcast-exclusive exit interview. Both Kenney and his successor, Premier-designate Danielle Smith, sat down with our Mercedes Stephenson for interviews airing on the West Block this Sunday. With a preview, here's our Abigail Beeman.
Some of what I see now, what I call it populism with a snarl, is not conservatism. It's about tearing things down and blowing things up. And that concerns me.
Jason Kenney points to social media, Donald Trump, anger, and conspiracy theories as contributing factors to this kind of populism.
COVID put that on steroids.
COVID, a big reason for Kenney's trouble on top. He tried to find the middle ground on restrictions, but angered both sides and flip-flopped. While his Conservative Premier colleague in Ontario, in similar shoes, ended up with a strong majority, though Doug Ford kicked out members of caucus who disagreed.
If I were to go back, I think I would have taken a more traditional Harper or Ford approach to managing those internal issues.
As for what he'd like to see in the party in his wake,
I think a Conservative Party or government that is focused on a campaign of recrimination over COVID, politicizing science, entertaining conspiracy theories, campaigning with QAnon, is a party that can't form government and shouldn't.
not necessarily recriminations from the incoming premier, but promises to stop any new COVID lockdowns and legislating against discrimination for the unvaccinated are top of Danielle Smith's list.
We're going to make sure that there is no worker who gets fired from their job because they have made a medical choice about being vaccinated, and we can do that in our jurisdiction. We are not going to be enforcing federal lockdown measures or federal restrictions.
Of course, her most publicized promise, a call for Alberta sovereignty in the face of Ottawa, as critics and constitutional experts sound the alarm.
We are going to make sure that we push back against their invasion of our jurisdiction, which they do all the time.
Without a seat yet, it will be a while before Smith can make legislative change. She now says she wants to start by reforming the province's healthcare system.
People will see that we are serious about fixing the problem that we have with rural ambulance, as well as the long waiting lists happening in emergency rooms.
Having to defeat 6 other candidates and not until the 6th ballot, party unity will also be a question as caucus figures itself out. Smith maintains she feels supported. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Next, home field advantage for the Blue Jays as playoff baseball returns to Toronto. Easter Island's iconic stone statues have been damaged by a forest fire. The fire was caused by a nearby volcano, and more than 100 hectares have been charred on the remote island since Monday. The island's home to hundreds of giant Polynesian stone heads known as the moai that were carved centuries ago. Authorities are still assessing the damage, but there is concern it may be irreparable. Canada's only Major League Baseball team is on deck for a pretty exciting weekend. For the first time in 6 years, the Toronto Blue Jays are playing a postseason game in front of fans. The team is facing off against the Seattle Mariners in a best-of-3 wildcard series. Mike Trelay is touching base with fans who are gearing up for another blue wave.
Fanatic? Yeah. 11-year-old Logan Nicholson, decked out head to toe in Blue Jays gear, qualifies.
I just love the Jays so much.
And if a home run ball comes his way, he has his priorities.
Would you push your dad out of the way to get the ball?
Yeah.
Logan is too young to remember when the Jays became a national obsession in 2015.
Let's go, Blue Jays!
To summarize, it was nuts.
Blue Jays! Blue Jays! Blue Jays!
Jays jerseys and hats everywhere. And while this is an entirely new team, they've been told.
There's a lot of guys, who work in the organization who have pretty much all they talk about is, that 15-16 run where the Rogers Center felt like it was going to fall over.
That same fever has yet to grip the fandom. It's more like the sniffles at this point. Veteran broadcaster Buck Martinez, who missed part of the season fighting cancer, expects a repeat.
It will be the same sort of vibe, no question about it. It's been 6 years since they've hosted a postseason game in this ballpark.
Will the Blue Wave catch on across the country like it has for Tara Mason?
It's a good look, right?
What do you think of your mom dressing up like this?
Cool.
If the team wins, it will be hard to knock the Jays off their perch. The hockey season starts next week. And
it does?
Mike Trelay, Global News, Toronto.
What a way to end that. And that's Global National for this Friday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Kamloops, BC, and we love seeing Your Canada. So please keep emailing us those photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.